Okay, 3, 2, 1, we are live. And I'm just getting set up here and just rambling for a moment while we make sure that we are connected here. And I'm just messing around here trying to get everything working. There's a rumor that we might be having buffering issues today, issues with the live stream running smoothly. Hopefully we're going to give it a try. We're going to try to run this lesson and hope that we don't have technical issues. It sounds like YouTube's actually having, I looked at their outage report and they've had this big surge in complaints of their video quality right now. So I think that there might be a YouTube issue. We're going to blame YouTube, and we're going to hope that things go smoothly for us. So hi everyone, and welcome to lesson 2 of our watercolor splash course. I'm just trying to get my chat set up so I can take a peek from time to time. And it's even giving me sign-in issues on the chat. So it's just a day for issues, and that's a day that's it's actually ideal for us because we're talking about what to do when you run into roadblocks in your watercolor journey today. So what great timing to be dealing with technical issues as well. And yes, if there's a positive way to frame something, I'm going to do my very best to find it. So Nina is here. My friend Nina is keeping an eye on the chat. Unfortunately, again, with the technical issues we've had, the chat is even being quite sporadic here. It's not letting me sign into chat either. Oh, and now it just did. So we're just having some consistency issues. We're going to try to power through. And that's what you do. We face our problems. We don't run away. And then we make an effort to find the good side. So here we are. Hi everyone. I'm hoping you can hear me and that I did press the right buttons and we're all good. My big fear, of course, is talking to myself. Although yeah, okay, so we're good. Having the chat a little less responsive, it's not keeping up today very well, and so that makes it harder for me to know if things are actually streaming properly. Just a little bit of a recap of what we're going to be doing today and what this splash course is all about. 3 days is not enough time to teach you. Even if we had 3 full days, it's not enough time to teach you watercolor. A lot of watercolor, the skill of watercolor, is doing doing the stuff over and over again to build those skills. So we are just here to take a look and dive a little deeper, and also to adopt an empowered mindset, a mindset that recognizes your love for watercolor is your permission to pursue it, and the trust that you have what it takes to learn this skill. And when the skill comes, then the freedom to express yourself and create from your heart. I am my own favorite artist. It sounds like the most stupid, arrogant things to say. I think the first time I thought it, I'm like, I can't tell anybody that. I'm my own favorite artist. And the reason for that is, and the reason I'm not ashamed of it anymore when I really thought about it, was that when I'm painting from my heart with true authenticity, how can I not love what I create? How can I not just connect deeply with what's coming out onto the paper? I have favorite artists from all over the world, and sometimes they'll make a painting that just hits me right in the heart, and it's amazing. I have this painting by Steve Putrich on my dining room wall, and I could linger over that painting every day, and I do. You eat my breakfast and I study that painting. But Steve, not all of Steve's paintings are ones that I love. I'm sorry, Steve, that's the truth. You know, there's going to be one every now and then that has that connection for me. But when I'm making my own best work, my most authentic work, I get to just love it unreservedly. And that's a really powerful thing. We should be our own favorite artists. We should be working in that direction. And I hope that encourages you a little bit, because there's a lot of talk about developing your personal style. We're going to talk about this again tomorrow. Developing your personal style is really just that pursuit of that truth and authenticity in your work. You're going to love your personal style because it's going to be the most genuine expression of you. every one of us has an amazing and wonderful and valuable perspective to share with the world. I think we have this little inner fear that maybe we won't like what we see when we dig a little deeper. Maybe there's nothing in there to get out on paper. And that's just not true. We all have amazing value and beauty in our hearts that we want to get out. So that's my soapbox. That's what I'm really passionate about. I teach watercolor techniques so that I can also teach that growth mindset, that belief. That's a really popular catchphrase right now, growth mindset. And it really just means, well, it's so many things, but it's that positivity. It's the belief that truth is freeing. And I love seeing and promoting that in art. Okay, this workshop, if you watched yesterday's session, one of yesterday's 2 sessions, I basically repeated the same material in both sessions. Although you are able to ask questions, so the questions change, but the sessions are the same. And so we did just a very first wet and wet wash. We talked about painting wet and wet. We talked about why watercolor is wonderful and how people tend to say negative things about it, like you can't fix mistakes in watercolor. And we're going to tackle that topic today. And then the flip side, there's always a positive that goes with those negatives. It's never just negative. And if you love watercolor, you believe it's worth the occasional trouble that we have with it. And so there's that. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat. It's usually on the right side of your screen, depending on your device. And if you can't see it, sometimes you have to look for a little arrow and pop that down. Nina is there keeping an eye out for your questions. Ask them anytime during the broadcast. She's going to paste them into a list for me so that I can answer them at the end. That helps me to teach just with a little bit more flow. And you can watch the recording of this broadcast after we wrap it up, so that if you miss something, if you have to step away, if your dog starts barking, mine's getting she's very guardy outside in the yard right now. And I'm going to show you her in a minute, just gratuitous dog photos. But yeah, if you have to step away, it's still going to be here for you afterwards. Yesterday we took a look at basic watercolor supplies. There is a link to that in the description below the video. And we talked about how rules in watercolor are good to learn, but not laws. We learn them so that we can decide what we're going to do with them and how we're going to handle them. My stomach just growled really loud. I want to tell you again a little bit about my story as an artist. I talked to you yesterday about taking my first art class at the age of 18, my first watercolor class. And I talked about being a self-taught artist, and I just wanted to address that for a minute again. I believe that we are all self-taught artists. We have to implement what we learn. And in that process, because we're developing a skill, we have to make it our own. My daughter plays piano. She's been taking lessons for 9 years now. And it's funny because when somebody finds out she plays piano, most of the time, unless they're looking for their own piano teacher, they don't say, oh, are you self-taught? What piano teacher do you have? We don't talk about, we don't link them so closely with her teacher. We recognize that Rory, in her pursuit of excellence in piano, she puts in many hours of practice. She does drills. Yes, she has a teacher to guide her, but with that teacher comes this responsibility to develop skill. And yet, for some reason, when we talk about our artistic journey, we always feel like we have to qualify it. Well, I'm self-taught. And sometimes we say, I'm just self-taught. Well, being self-taught really just means you've put in those drills, like your piano practice, your musical instruments, which I think is a really good comparison because it is also an artistic discipline. You build the skills through the practice. And that's really important. At one point in my journey, and I've always been a person who's very ambitious. I wanted to be the best watercolor artist, and I would read, as a teenager, I had watercolor magazines. And I didn't know a lot of other watercolor artists. So I had myself as a student, I had maybe other hobbyists in the area, and then I had the world-class artists who were in my favorite magazines, and that was who I wanted to be. And at some point along the way, I would enter in art competitions in the community, and I never would win anything. And at some point I just said, you know what, maybe I'm not meant to be a world-class artist. And maybe I just will never have the skill that it takes to be at that peak of my profession that I want to be. And as I realized and I thought about that, and what do I do now that I've realized that I don't have that kind of caliber of skill, and I had to decide, do I keep painting or do I give it up and decide I want to go be the best at something else? And at that point, I realized I loved watercolor enough. I had to make it about the love of what I was doing rather than this pursuit of a finish line. We all run the race. We don't all get the prize, but so we run for the joy of running. And in that process of letting go of that need to be the perfect, best, world-class artist, that freed me up a lot. Because then I started to think about what do I really, not what's going to be the best art that's going to get me the most recognition, but what is the art that I'm going to make that's going to be the most authentic and most rewarding for me. And I started to follow some artists who were doing things that I wished I could do. I discovered Jean Haynes and Linda Kemp. And if you're a fan of loose watercolor, you're very likely know one of those names. These were artists who were showing amazing freedom in their painting. And they were really trusting their viewers to understand the paintings that came from their heart. And that gave me the courage to do the same. My style, I'm teaching watercolor here to you today. My style might not be for you. You might prefer another style of art. So that's why we're focusing on technique today. I'm not asking you to paint like me. I don't want you to paint like me. I want you to paint like you. So we learn the techniques and we learn the rules, and then we figure out that communication from the heart and how to get that on the paper. As you do this, you get to develop this empowered mindset. In a way, one that gives you permission to grow your skills in a way that works for you. I learned along the way that there were certain things, certain ways of learning that did not work for me. I am not an artist who can paint organized notebooks of color swatches, and there's beautiful color swatches out there, and artists who spent many hours researching color, painting all those swatches so they can see how all the colors mix and match, and referring to that as their reference. There are artists who spend a lot of time developing the structure of their composition and drawing thumbnails and value studies and doing extensive research to develop this beautiful, there's a really good word and I just don't have it. This is a beautiful, controlled and planned painting. And that is also not me. Every time I get the pencil out to do a sketch, I feel locked in. I don't feel free. When I try to do scientific things like research paint and paint color swatches, I feel locked in. I don't feel free. So I felt bad about that. I felt guilty. And when I realized that I could paint and learn, even though I wasn't doing those things that I thought I should do, that's the second time I've used air quotes, so cut me off from doing it again. When I realized that I was still learning, even though I was learning to draw, even though I wasn't using a pencil. I was learning color mixing, even though I wasn't making swatches. And that was very freeing, doing it in my way. And so if you're the kind of person who rebels against all those structured shoulds, oh, I almost did air quotes again. If you're that kind of artist who rebels against it, join my club. We get to learn in our own way. It might take a little longer. I can't guarantee that it won't, but we have more fun. So there's that. Okay, so we're going to look today at some common trouble spots, and I just am going to pop up on my screen, if you'll bear with me, as I find the exact right place to go. We're just going to go over what today's lesson is about. Oh, I'm really slow today. Here we go. Here's the gratuitous picture of my dog that I told you about. She has the most beautiful eyes. That's Ari, and I'm just sharing it with you because she's just so pretty and special. Okay, so we're moving on. This is talking about problem solving today. We are going to look at some watercolor techniques. We're going to look at edges. We're going to look at layering. We're going to look at a little bit of brush handling, and we're going to look at negative painting. But we're also going to do some problem solving. And watercolor is all about problem solving. I call it the white paper versus brain problem. when you have that piece of blank paper in front of you, and sometimes we're afraid of it because we just can only imagine all the ways we're going to mess it up and fail at our painting. And I have actually a series of emails that you can sign up for in the description below the video that talks about countering all of the fear that we face as artists. I would encourage you to sign up for that if you haven't already. But what we have is we have a beautiful picture in our brain and we have a piece of white paper. And the very first problem we face is how to get that picture in our brain out onto our paper. And from there, the next problem is that first brush stroke goes down. It might not look exactly like what you thought it would look like, or it might not be a clear direction into the next brush stroke. So then it's always adapting. Every brush stroke we have to adapt what's in our brain, what's on the paper, and make those fit together. So that's a huge challenge. And then we make a mistake. Oh no. So now what do I do when I make a mistake? How does it affect my mindset? And how do I respond to that mistake? And we're going to look at that today. And then recognize as well that every painting you create is brand new territory. It's something that's never been created before. I can't tell you how to paint that thing in your head. I can't see into your brain, first of all. And I've never painted that painting before. So I can show you what I do and demonstrate and try to explain it as clearly as I can and focus on principles. But we recognize that every time we paint a new subject, we are breaking brand new ground. We are the only ones who know what we want that painting to look like. We are the only ones who have done that painting before. Or who have not, no one has done that painting before. We are the only ones who can decide how that painting is going to go. It's brand new territory. And that's actually a really exciting thing. And then we have this battle between ourselves and our reference photo. If you're painting from a reference photo, trying not to be a slave to the reference, trying not to just feel like you have to copy exactly what you see. And then also in that battle for control, we have expectations. We have what we wanted to create, and then we have what's actually happening on the paper. And so those are really big battles that we face every time we paint. We're going to talk about that today. And some positive ways to reframe those things. We're going to cover some techniques, as I said, negative painting. We're going to look at edges and softening out, which we looked at very quickly yesterday. We're going to paint small scale wet and wet, which we did in just one very short demo yesterday. So we're going to actually show it in a real life painting situation. We're going to talk about wet on dry, and that's a bit of a review as well. And we're going to look at how watercolor changes as we layer it. It's a big lesson and we have a lot to cover, so we need to get on with that. Do remember that you can ask your questions in the chat and Nina will keep track of them. I will answer as many of them as I can at the end. And again, check the description below for links to my Fearless Artist email series. These are, all of these links are to free content for you. My Fearless Artist email series, the Watercolor Mastery info sessions. We're starting Watercolor Mastery in April. I want you to know whether or not it might be a good fit for you. So there's a link to sign up so that you can get all the information about that and how to tell if you're ready to step into Watercolor Mastery. And then that link for basic supplies. If you're a raw beginner and you have no idea what supplies to buy, you probably want to go to that link rather than the Watercolor Mastery. Be patient with yourself, let your skills build, then you'll be ready to really tackle some of that deeper stuff. We do our drills like a piano player before we actually move on to, the complicated stuff. We're going to just switch over to my work surface. Here she is. And I've got this stack of paintings here I wanted to show you. And I'm just going to, there we go. Okay. Move over right here. And as you can see here, I've got a few paintings and I'll just show you the stack. We're not going to look at all of them. This is what I've been painting probably in the last 6 months or so. These are the paintings that I really feel good about and I'm considering framing. This one actually isn't quite done yet. And so I'm actually considering how I'm going to finish it. This is one that's not quite done yet, considering how to finish it. This is one I did as a demo for a class, I think. And then we have a lot of trees. I love painting trees. So, and I think you can see that free expression that happens when I'm painting those trees. This one, I actually have this big blob of black right in the corner. And looking at that one little mark today made me so happy. I don't know what it was, but it just made me smile. So I signed right beside it so that when I frame it, that little blob is going to be in the frame. Something calm and peaceful. This is actually a lesson you can find on my YouTube channel. Colorfulness. Some things from past classes that I've done. Just lots of stuff. More trees. Another tree. My criteria for whether or not I like a painting, some of these you definitely will recognize from YouTube. My criteria for whether or not a painting should be framed, this one makes me very happy, is how it makes me feel. Does it make me happy? I have actually, this one I think is pretty cool. I have a video here on YouTube that's one of my oldest tutorials. It's cornflowers and lilies in watercolor. And I looked at that painting recently and I thought, you know, what if you did that again as an abstract? And that's what happened when I did that. So again, just things that are fun. And so I just showed you a stack. There's probably 30 paintings in that pile. Now I want to show you the other stack from the last 6 months. And it's here on the floor. This is the other pile. And I would say there's, I was going to say 3 times as many paintings in this pile as there is in the other, but I think it's more like 4 or 5 times. There are a lot of pieces of paper in this pile. Now I paint frequently, very often, but that is my pile of things that are not good enough to frame, things that I don't really love, things that made my other paintings. I'm just going to drop my camera down, and there's not a smooth and graceful way to do it. I'm sorry. There we go. And then I think we're good. Okay, so that stack, 5 times as many paintings in the not great stack, that's where the learning happens. Without those paintings, I don't get to have the 30 that I'm really excited about and want to frame. And I want you to be really aware of that. I'm a professional painter with 20 plus years of experience, and I am not hitting home runs every time I wield my brush. I'm not hitting any home runs because I don't even have a baseball bat. But yeah, I think you know what I mean. So be aware that if you're not allowing yourself space to fail, space to learn, you are going to feel defeated. You're going to feel like a failure, and it's not true. The learning has to happen in those mistakes, in the paintings that don't hit the mark. My daughter plays piano. She does not play every note perfectly, and that does not mean she is not a pianist. It doesn't mean she doesn't have musical talent. She has to practice. She has to hit wrong notes in order to learn. She cannot erase the possibility that she's going to make a mistake. And sometimes it's at the recital after a year of practicing the same song. And so we give ourselves room, and we don't let those failures be a judgment of our abilities. I cannot stress this enough. I want you to stay encouraged so that you don't give up on your paintings and on yourself. So we learn positive ways to coach ourselves through those times when nothing is turning out. Okay, so we painted a wet and wet background yesterday, and I really probably made it fancier than I should have. And I just remembered I was going to find my transparent Mylar. Hang on. I have to try to remember where I put it. I want to show you, I've got some transparent paper somewhere in my studio here, and I completely forgot to pull it out. I think I know where it is, so hold on for 30 seconds. Okay, so you know when you clean your studio and then you completely forget where you put everything? That didn't happen today. We are in luck. So I have a transparent sheets. It's called Duralar. And what I want to do is I want to use this. It's a polyester film that actually accepts water media. Kind of like Yupo, but it's completely transparent. And I'm throwing that over my paper today because I want to show you what's in my head before I actually start putting paint on the paper. I should have really just done the very basic single tulip on a piece of paper, but then I started adding color and it was a bigger sheet of paper, and so we ended up getting a little more going on here than we might ordinarily plan for. And So I'm gonna just show you what I'm thinking of doing, what I see in my head, because I'm not gonna touch this with a pencil. And then from there, we'll actually go and implement it. So we have some pinks, we have green, and we have yellow. This is the foundation for our painting. The very next step is going to be using a combination of negative painting and wet on dry painting and a little wet on wet to create the painting we want to see. So we're going to take our paint, we're going to find a tulip right in here, and I'm just going to make it one big tulip because the goal here is to keep it simple. Painting simple subjects just makes it a little bit easier to plan for success. So we've got like 3 petals, and we're going to pretend this is one of those tulips that's kind of overblown. It's opened a little further than we might see in, you know, that perfect pretty picture. So we can actually see those stamens in the tulip. So they look something like that. We have a pink over here, but we're going to let that be a diffused background flower, and we're going to place a stem in here, and then I think this will be a leaf, and maybe this will be a leaf. So we're going to keep it really simple. One flower, focus on that. That's going to be our focal point because it's the most important thing in the scene. It's the only thing in the scene. And so that's what we're planning for. So that's what I'm seeing in my brain. Those are the shapes that I'm thinking of as I start this painting. I want you to be aware of that so you can kind of follow along. We'll set that aside. Isn't this a cool transparent film? I'm so excited to be able to use this for teaching. Okay, so moving on from there, actually putting the brush to the paper again. Now we have a couple things we want to do. Right now, this is not a painting, and I think if you were to frame this and try to put it in the gallery, you would feel incomplete. We need some direction in our scene, and that's why we start to build up our color and create some edges, and those edges are going to form the shapes of our flower. I haven't cleaned my palette. I get to use the same colors as I had yesterday, and that way I'm not wasting color. I don't like cleaning my palette because it feels wasteful. I get some of my most beautiful neutrals once this palette starts to get a little bit dirty. So we're going to just start by painting, I think, this petal right here, and this is going to be an edge of that flower, just using a juicy amount of paint and filling in that area. And because the paper's dry, we get this beautiful crisp edge. Now, what's the first thing we look at when we look at this painting? Our eye goes zing right to that corner because it is the strongest thing in the painting. It's got a crisp edge and it's got dark value. It's the strongest, boldest part of the painting. From here, however, we can decide we want to be a little more subtle maybe with our painting, and so we might decide to soften an edge here using a damp brush, and actually my brush is a little damper than it needs to be. I want a brush that's damp enough that it's not going to be a sponge, but I don't want it dripping where I'm adding puddles of moisture to the painting. So then we can soften from here right into the flower, and then that actually has basically eliminated that edge. And that's the nice thing right now. At this stage, I have some options. And I can keep my flower shape. I'm going to keep it nice and strong here. Sometimes what I will do is a lost and found edge, and I'll show you that in this next petal that we do. We'll paint this one right here. So I'm just finding that outer shape. I'm not outlining, I'm using the side of my brush to fill this area quickly. I'm going to keep this shape as that front petal, and it's going to be a little lighter, like the sun is falling on it and there's casting a shadow inside of the flower as well. And a light touch with my brush. And so now I have a really crisp edge here. Sometimes in watercolor, it's so much better to encourage the feeling of transparency by creating some lost and found edges. Edges that kind of come and go a little bit. So with a damp brush, I can soften and let some of that pink flow out into the background. And there's not a lot of pink pigment and water here, so it doesn't flow a lot. It just gives me a really gentle transition right there. And that's just a little more gentle and combines with the background just a little bit better than if I were to paint that as a crisp hard edge. It just seems prettier. We're going to paint this side of the flower now. And this time I am going to paint a line, and I'm going to do that softening thing again, only this time I'm going to do it inside of the petal, and that's going to give me that nice soft transition, basically the same thing I got over here. Now all of this time we've just used the pink, kind of our pink mixture, but I could be going into other colors as well. I could choose, and I'm just mixing a little of that yellow right here to get a peachy color. I could choose to put in a little bit of that peach, maybe toward the center of the flower. Maybe we want the heart of our tulip to have some warmth, warm yellows. Or maybe I want to choose a blue to be a bit of a shadow color, you know, down below where those petals kind of cluster in. And I have a little bit of time while everything's wet to dot in color and let it flow in a soft and pretty way. And the other thing I can do at this stage, and I'm going to grab a little more yellow. This is a mixture of my Hansa yellow and my phthalo turquoise. This spray bottle is giving me issues. To take it to the dollar store for a refund, right? Get my money back. Okay, so we're going to just grab, I just lightened my green by adding a little more yellow to it, and I made a nice little petal with water as well. I'm going to just pull my stem out right now, and that gives me another opportunity for that soft transition. Because some of that green is going to creep up into the flower, and this is where we often panic. And I need to be making some deliberate mistakes so we know how to deal with that. So let's do that too. As we talk about the role of mistakes in watercolor, we need to have some mistakes to work on. So say our green comes up into our flower more than we'd like, and we've got a bloom here. We used too much water on this edge of this petal, so it's starting to get blotchy. I think you can see that there. And this is where we start to panic. How do we fix mistakes when our flower is starting to fail us? When we're starting to fail ourselves and our hopes for our painting? And so there's a few things you can do. First thing you can do, and I think probably when I was learning to paint, 90% of my painting time, well, not 90%, but a good 60 or 70% of my painting time was spent with paper towel in hand, putting a brush stroke down on the paper, and then dabbing it up in fear and trepidation. I would panic. I would start to see that paint doing things I didn't like, and I would lift and blot. So you can lift using your paper towel while the color is damp, and get your paper closer to white. Get some of that color off the page. And unfortunately, when we do that, we change the balance of moisture in the painting. We've lifted out not just paint, but moisture as well. And so to continue to paint on this now, I might end up just repeating the same mistakes because I have now kind of this blotchy surface to paint on. When your paper has that kind of paper towel consistency, it's not shiny right now, it's just absorbent. I don't have flow, I just have paint that soaks in. And so by blotting and then trying to continue painting, I often end up continuing the mistake. So that's something to be aware of, is that if you're going to be lifting color, a lot of times the best thing to do after you lift those colors is just to stop and let everything dry and then go back and build up those colors that you lifted out in the way that you wanted them. And I'm blotting right now because there is some blotchy things happening. There is you can lift and slow the movement of the paint with lifting out, but it's also very hard to go back in and continue painting. So that's one way you can try to fix the problem. The other thing you can do sometimes is try to cover a mistake. And I'm not sure if I have a space I can do that on this paper. Well, let's say we're going to use this for all our problems. Let's say this area was meant to be pink. So I didn't realize until after it dried that my pink flower that I wanted to paint here should have been over here more. So I can say, well, let me try to cover that and make that pink. Well, what do I get in that area if I try to layer and put the pink where it was supposed to be in the first place? I have pink, and I have pink with green underneath it. And watercolor is transparent, so it's going to still reveal what was there to begin with. And so that's not a great way to resolve an issue. And I don't. So I sometimes, and again, this stinking spray bottle that I keep going for. Here's the one that works. Sometimes rinsing away, adding water, and letting that extra color flow off the paper actually works better than trying to, just that's something you can do. It lightens the color. I still have a hint of pink there, but for the most part, I'm back to where I was originally, except my paper's wetter now. So lifting out, rinsing away, those are ways of kind of erasing things. I wouldn't rinse away over here because then I end up adjusting all of the moisture balance in this painting. I don't want to talk a lot more about lifting out because it's actually a way of backing up. It's like reversing. And lifting out doesn't always work. Sometimes we have staining colors. Phthalo turquoise is a really good example. It's a staining color. It soaks into your paper so fast, you're never getting back to white. And so I think trying to undo what we've done isn't always the best solution. Sometimes we just need to roll with it and figure out how to make it work. So I'm trying to think if I have an example to give you. Let's just paint a little bit more and we'll watch for some mistakes to happen that we can use as learning tools. So let's paint those leaves that we were talking about. Over here, I'm using the same greens as I used early on. Phthalo turquoise, the Hansa yellow, or Hansa yellow. Actually, I think I used the benzimidalone yellow in our morning session, and then I switched to Hansa yellow in the afternoon. I'm not going to worry too much about it, but I do try to keep a consistent color throughout the painting because I want the layers that go on top of my first layer to connect. I want them to be linked together. So here we have, say I had too much phthalo turquoise on my brush, and so I started painting and I'm like, oh no, I put all this phthalo turquoise and I was trying to paint with the yellower green. Well, I could blot and lift, and that again takes moisture out of the leaf, and so then it doesn't, the rest of the color doesn't flow as well. So I might be better off saying, well, maybe I should decide to like this new color and do more of it. So that could be deciding that if I like the phthalo turquoise in the leaf, maybe it adds a spark of drama that I didn't have before. So let's do more of it. Let's add some phthalo turquoise to our stem. And this is my favorite way to fix mistakes, to make them my new favorite thing. Suddenly, because of that mistake, I've seen new possibilities. I have now a leaf that's a little more interesting and vibrant. And I can say, wow, you know, I wouldn't have tried that on my own because I felt safe using kind of this in-between kind of green. But when I added that pop of phthalo turquoise, let's make it a really big pop on this one. It just made my painting come alive, and now I'm so excited to be using this really rich, strong contrast color that made my painting more impactful. And I think sometimes the reason we get so panicked and want to fix mistakes is because you put a brush stroke down and it has this big impact, and that's scary. It changes things and it takes us in a direction we hadn't anticipated, and that feels wrong. But sometimes we get really beautiful results out of it. We cannot be afraid of those dramatic things that happen because they're so powerful. Look at how much more interesting my tulip became when I added those rich greens. So make mistakes your new favorite thing. You know, and sometimes it's just saying, you know what, by adding that here, here, and here, having that phthalo turquoise, now this mistake looks intentional, and it's so much more interesting and exciting that way. So that's really my favorite way to deal with mistakes. We are in a battle for control. Watercolor, we are on this journey of both control and collaboration. And when we lose sight of the collaboration, that's when we feel like we're fighting with things. I can only work on a trouble area and change it to a certain degree. There are limitations to what I can do, and sometimes I just need to let watercolor do its thing and be present in the moment so that I can do it, to work with it. I like to, realizing that some of the most beautiful things happen when I stay open to allow watercolor to do its thing. That gives me a little bit of freedom, and it makes it just a little bit more exciting. Okay, I think I've worn out my notes, so that means I can just focus on this painting and what we want to do with it. Another thing that might happen sometimes for you is you might be painting and your brush splatters color on the paper, and you can see that's a terrifying thing. I just dropped green on my paper. So the first thing, of course, I'm going to try to do is lift it off, and I get some of it off a little bit. But I also have some up here, and maybe lifting it off is going to leave white spots, or maybe actually in here you can actually see a hint of the green still. So that means I now could either scrub that and know that it's going to make my painting look fussed over. I don't know if you can see how much texture was created by lifting out on this petal. There is not the same smooth first wash that I did, and I cannot get back to that. I have to make my peace with what this is right now and figure out how to work with it or move on to a new painting. That's why there's 5 times more unsuccessful paintings than I have ones that I would frame, because I learn a lot of stuff. I make that painting teach me everything it can before I move on and try it on a new piece of paper. So I might not be 100% satisfied with my tulip as I'm painting it. So that gives me the freedom to say, you know what? I know I'm not going to frame this tulip. I'm not happy with the shape of the petal on this side, and I don't think I can change it, but I'm going to throw paint at this thing until I've learned everything I can. It's given me everything it has. So that means I get to get a little bit bolder. Mistakes free us to try things that we wouldn't try on our own. And if you're not making mistakes, are you really learning? So I'm trying to cover that splotch of green that I dropped with more pink. And if I get my pink dark and rich enough into the quinacridone magenta, I should be able to see that green mostly disappear. I can say, while I'm doing this, I'm going to drop in some of that ultramarine. That's going to give me an interesting violet color. We're being really brave right now because we have the freedom to do that. We're working on a painting we're not 100% satisfied with, and that gives us that opportunity to keep moving. If I'm not making mistakes, I'm probably stuck in my comfort zone doing things that feel comfortable but don't necessarily, and they give me brush miles. They help me to grow more adept at brush handling, and I'm going to learn things about color mixing. Isn't that pretty? But I don't learn to the same extent, in the same dramatic fashion as when I take risks. You can only ride your bike with training wheels for so long before you have to take them off and take that next step. And there's no training wheels in between the training wheels. You know, at some point you have to just cut yourself loose and go for it. So I'm adding rich color right now to make my focal point work. And I think that's really pretty, actually. Now, if we're being daring, what about if I added some yellow? I like that peachy color, but what if I took the Hansa yellow? It's a little bit opaque, so you can touch it in over top of a darker magenta, and you can see some drama happen too. Everything's juicy enough. And so you can see how it's floating over the ultramarine here. It even though it's a lighter value color, because it's not 100% transparent, it can actually cover that blue, which I don't like. So I'm using a thirsty brush to really gently lift it. Gentle, gentle lifting works usually better than panicked dabbing and blotting. Slow down and watch what your painting is doing, and you're going to get some beautiful results. So there's my flower. That's one way to paint a flower, and what we've done just now is positive painting. We have been painting the thing so that we have really darker color on our focal point, darker values. The other side of the coin. And we are running a little low on time. I want to get to your questions here in a few minutes, but I do want to look at the other side of watercolors. When you're not painting the thing, you are painting the thing around the thing. And I'm going to just make that a little more explanatory. Say that I wanted to have a tulip over in this corner, and I don't know if my acetate's going to help me on this one. There we go. How did I do with the thought in my brain? I did okay. It's not perfect. Didn't match completely what was in my head. Say I want to paint a flower over here, and it's going to be coming off the page, and it's going to be, you know, a tulip in this area. So if I want to have a tulip over here, I can either paint that tulip by making it a darker pink, but if I make it a darker pink, then it's going to compete with this tulip. So then I have two dark pink flowers that are hard to separate. So what I might decide to do is paint this as a pale pink tulip by darkening the background. And this is what we call negative painting. So I might carve out in my mind a petal right along here. And I really should wait for this tulip to dry. So we're gonna just we're gonna cheat a little bit and just leave a little margin around there so that those colors don't bleed together too much. I think I did touch the pink a little bit. So I just painted negative painting. It's not great negative painting, but it's the beginning. I painted around the edge of the flower on this side. And that doesn't tell us that this is a flower, but it gives us an edge where our eye instantly goes there and sees that we're contouring around something. I could maybe carry that shape into here. And now I'm starting to cover some of the pink that was in the background, so that gets kind of a neutral, murky color as I layer. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can layer colors that aren't the same color. It just is going to give you a duller tone, a duller color. Duller color rhymes. And here too I can contour. I can negative paint. And I'm not going to finish. Ordinarily, I would pull this green all the way down until it bled away into nothing. Same on this side. I wouldn't want to have any edges except the edges that were delineating this background tulip. I can also use negative painting inside of the tulip to indicate a petal. So maybe I have a petal on this side. So then I paint that outer curve. So negative painting, often I think we feel intimidated by that word. I don't know how to negative paint, but if you're painting around stuff, if you're painting the background of something and painting around the other object, you're creating, and that's the really terrible contour right there, but we're just not going to worry about it too much. I'm painting the inner part of the flower. I'm painting around, negative painting around those outer petals, and I can decide to make my negative painting a little more subtle by softening some edges again. That's a little more graceful and gives me more of a background feel. So softening edges is a really good way to tone down an area that might be too strong and competing with your focal point. I still have color bleeding into my background here. I'm just going to lift some color so it doesn't continue to bleed more. So that's really the basics. I do have lessons on negative painting in my online classes at learn.angelafair.com. We can spend a lot of time with it. And I think I cover it probably in a YouTube free video here on YouTube as well. So take a look, see what you can track down. I wanted to just, it's really quick. We're not doing it justice, but that gives you an idea of where I might go to develop the painting. I loved using the clear acetate so that I could go and show you what was in my head before I actually put it on the paper. That's kind of a cool little feature. You get to see inside my brain. So that's our tulip demo. We painted the background yesterday, and that gave us this framework to build on. So now we have almost a completed painting. Really, it's very simple, but I think simple is good. We tend to get really complicated. And I was thinking about jigsaw puzzles, and I love doing puzzles at Christmas. And my family usually, like my mother-in-law will buy these beautiful puzzles, scenery. And so you have a church, and you have a lake, and you have distant farmland or whatever, and a waterfall, and all of these elements. And because it's a puzzle, You want a lot of detail in all of it so that you can figure out which piece goes where. But in painting, we don't want to be painting jigsaw puzzles. We look for a focal point and we build our painting around that. And we add just the information that's needed to reinforce our focal point. And that helps us when we're learning to paint, starting with what do I want people to see and remember about this painting. And as you're learning and teaching yourself, negative painting is much simpler when you're painting a single subject. Learning how to guide the eye through the composition is simpler if you're painting a simple subject. Don't feel like your paintings have to be complicated. Some of the best painters that I know stick to very simple subjects because they're passionate about them. They don't feel like they need to, bolster their reputation or qualify themselves by painting something really complicated to show how skilled they are. They're painting from their passion. I'm going to take a look at your questions right about now. Nina's been saving them for me in a doc, and I'm a little afraid of how many pages it's going to be. We'll take a look. Yes, let's see here. The videos are available here on YouTube indefinitely. I'm not planning to take them off. I know that means you can share them with your friends and other people you know who are interested in watercolor. I really want them to be able to have the full set of lessons. If you're watching these, I know you guys got the specific link in your email inbox. I think most of you are here because of that. I'd love to have you on my mailing list because I share so much good stuff. I get emails every week from people who tell me how much they look forward to being encouraged and educated, mostly encouraged, about their watercolor journey. My goal is that you love this journey enough to not quit. And we have to learn patterns of positive self-coaching, really, so that you stay encouraged during the process. So do take a look at the description below the video, sign up for my mailing list, visit angelafair.com. I have a mailing list, sign up there too. There's no reason that you shouldn't be getting those emails and feeling boosted and encouraged by the things I have to share as I work to stay encouraged on my own watercolor journey. It was a little bit embarrassing to show you my huge stack of paintings that are not going to see frames and see the light of day. They're learning tools, and it's a little bit vulnerable to show that big stack to you. And I know you're thinking, oh, that's so much money worth of paper, but the learning that happened there made the paintings I love so much better. And so I can't feel bad about that. Okay, so questions. Fiddler asks, differences between staining and non-staining paints. Basically, the staining ones are just going to build a very close relationship with your paper very quickly. And the best way to know if your paints are staining or non-staining is to use them. Phthalo turquoise is a really good example of a staining paint. It's almost one of the very few that I have that is quite staining. I love the way paint can swim on the surface of the paper and sometimes even be relifted when it's re-wet. So my preference is for the non-staining paints. And a lot of that information on what paints are staining and non-staining you can find online. Handprint.com is a really excellent resource. Jane Blundell has some really good information on color as well. Caring for brushes, I never leave my brush standing in my water. I don't want to bend the tips. I try to dry them flat rather than upright, because then the water, I don't want any water to stay in the ferrule and swell the handle or loosen the bristles. Aside from that, I don't use a special soap to clean them or anything like that. I try to handle them gently, and it's pretty straightforward with watercolor. Do you ever need to use distilled water, or is tap water sufficient? I've tried distilled water. I don't see a difference. Some people will swear by using a certain type of water, but my water comes from the well that we have. I figure I paint quite well because of it. So that's the terrible pun for the day. Okay, my watercolor mastery course, I'm going to tell you about that in a moment. I have a question about it. Michael Ann asks, what do you do with the paintings you don't like? I hang on to them for a long, long time. That big stack of paintings, often I'll flip through it. Sometimes something will pop out at me that I love now, but I didn't love when I painted it. And sometimes we get so attached to the problem solving, like we feel during a painting process like, oh, I'm fixing mistakes and I'm fixing more mistakes, and you're fighting with this painting, and all my emotions about that painting are negative because of that battle that went on while I was painting it. And I have to detach from the painting long enough to be able to be objective about whether the painting's actually any good or not. So I don't just say, oh, this painting is terrible, and pitch it immediately. I want to hang on to everything so that I can be more objective about, you know, what works and what doesn't. And I can learn a lot by looking through past paintings. I also sometimes chop them up and write notes on them and send little note cards to people when I get mail. So there's that. Okay, so the Duralar that I have, I just found it at my local art supply store, which does not have an extensive selection. It's quite glossy. I think I just thought, I bought it the other day and I thought, well, now what am I going to do with this stuff? And I love that I get to use it for teaching. That's kind of fun. Leslie asks, you say you do not mix colors for the most part in your palette, yet I see you do put color in your wells. Is that to get the right water to paint ratio? Most of the time it is. If I want to dilute my paint and work with paler colors, I'm going to be mixing in my palette. And it is a really good place to mix some neutrals. Susan says, your brush springs back as opposed to bending like mine. Does that make a difference? The quality of the brush you have is going to change how you paint. I started out using cheap brushes, cheap synthetics that were quite stiff, and that felt controlled to me. It felt like I had more control. And then over the years, I've really fallen in love with using a soft brush that has a little more organic feel to it. Yes, okay. Angela, I was wondering what tips you have on how to avoid the first problem where the colors ran together and created mud. Okay, there's a couple things there. I try to be very careful to know what my colors are going to do when they go on the paper together. So I know that if I'm putting green in beside pink on my tulip, that those two colors, when they run together, they get dull, they get neutralized because they are complements. And so I have an awareness that that's going to happen. I decrease my moisture a little bit if I want that to happen less, and I really watch for it. And then sometimes I really like it when it happens, because when you have two colors that are complements that mix together, they create this quiet space. Neutral, muddy mixes can be a quiet space in your painting that are really nice offset to the more vibrant colors. The tulip painting that I did today probably wouldn't be my first choice for something I would frame. I would choose, I'm just going to pop back there, I would probably look for some places to put some quiet neutrals. It's fun to work with bright colors, but having those quiet neutrals in the painting as well helps the focal point to sing just a little bit better. And the colors in the focal point appear more vibrant. So there's that. Okay, Nina comments, I've used the Mr. Clean eraser to fix small mistakes and it works great. Do you recommend that? I did not bring up Mr. Clean Magic Eraser today, but I have used it. The number of times I used it last year would probably be once. What I find is if I have a way to erase and back up, it's kind of I don't know how to put this. It's not always the best way to handle it. I really prefer, like I showed in my slideshow, pressing on, saying, okay, I have this thing that's happening. Now what do I do with it? Not how do I undo and start over. Acrylic and oil painters will paint layers and layers to get their painting right. And they can change a painting dramatically just by adding more layers of paint. My big stack of paintings was my layers and layers. They don't show up they don't go in the frame, but that's where I work out the issues. What I have found, the times when I've done pencil sketching and stuff, is when I erase something. I was drawing one of my kids the other day, and I couldn't get my son's eye right. And so I erased it and tried to draw it again. And my hand just magnetically traced that eye that I'd originally drawn. I get locked into that mistake and I just do the same thing over and over again. And so I love that with watercolor, I don't have to try to erase. I can take what I've been learning and adapt. And that's been really, really good for me and my problem solving abilities as an artist. Probably doesn't make me the best portrait artist, and that's a story for another question. But that's a story for another question. That doesn't even make sense. You know, that you might have to adapt your approach depending on your subject matter, which leads really well to Larry's question. Your subject matter is usually flowers and landscapes. What's the relationship between subject matter and success or not in watercolor? I think when it comes to subject matter, paint whatever you want. Learning good observation skills to think, what do I actually see, not what do I think I see. What I think I see is why first graders draw lollipop trees and houses that have triangle roofs. It doesn't work so well for trying to create impact in your paintings. And so really learning how to see. And for me, the one time that involved, I'm just looking at the painting up on the wall. I was painting a scene out of my window and the sun was starting to set, and the light was bouncing off the trees and gave the trunk an edge, a line of orange along the edge of the tree trunk. When I didn't think I should paint it, it felt wrong. Tree trunks don't have an orange outline. And yet when I put that line of orange in, the entire painting came alive because I was painting what I saw instead of what I thought I should see. So learning how to observe is really powerful in being able to depict different subjects. The other thing I would just suggest is if you're learning to paint, keep it simple. Again, focus on painting that one focal point really, really well. Okay, moving on. How do you feel about using gouache to fix mistakes? Using gouache is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on in a way, because gouache is a completely different kind of paint. It doesn't, it's not really like starting over. I do use gouache, and I can use gouache to adapt my technique and create some new effect. But just to use it to cover one mistake is probably not going to work really well because it's going to add this big spot of opaque color that's going to be really hard to unify with the rest of the painting. Mechna says, Angela, I got yellow mission gold paints and I find them to be a little too vibrant compared to the colors you are using. Is there a way to knock down the vibrancy? I would always, if your colors feel too vibrant, too bright, first of all, you can dilute and add water. That'll lighten them. But if the color itself is just too bright, if it feels too neon or something, what you want to do is take a look at your color wheel and mix a little bit of the opposite, the complementary color with that color. So if my pink is too vibrant and I need a little bit of a dulled down pink, I add a tiny bit of green to it. If my yellow is too vibrant, adding a tiny bit of violet will just gray it down like instantly. So knowing those things can really help you to have confidence with color mixing. Christy asks, when choosing colors for negative painting, is it best to choose a paint or mix that is most contrasting to the object, and how to decide what strength of pigment in that paint? No, I'm not sure how to phrase this. I think what I've seen is if you're going to get a different effect depending on what you choose. So first thing I like to do is just darken the value of that original color in my negative painting. So if I have, like today, I have a green background, so I would just paint more green to darken up that green a little bit and make the shape beside it pop a little bit more. On the other hand, if the green is too bright, then I would choose a complementary wash to go over it, knowing that that would tone it down. I don't have to darken my value as much in that case. So it really depends on what you're doing. I like to try to keep color unity, stay consistent with the original colors I used. And if I have to add new colors, maybe just one or two, and add them all over the painting in small doses so that it unifies and feels cohesive. I think that is pretty much all the questions we have today. I want to talk just for a minute, I know we're over time here, about watercolor mastery. And This isn't an advertisement. I don't just want you to rush out and sign up. First of all, you can't sign up yet because our enrollment opens March 5th. Watercolor Mastery, what it is I want you to know if you are struggling to make the transition from being a student of watercolor, painting step-by-step tutorials, if you're ready to take the next step to be a more independent artist, there's not a lot out there to help you. It was really hard when I was when I was developing my skills to know if I was going about it the right way or not. So much of the time I felt like I was muddling along. I wasn't sure if what I was trying to do was going to get me to where I wanted to be. And it was so reassuring after years had passed and I was able to look back and see the progression of my journey. It was so reassuring to realize that what I was doing would eventually get me there. But the steps, the things that I learned, a lot of them I had to learn the hard way, and I had to learn on my own, kind of in the dark. And so my heart was, I got dissatisfied with teaching step-by-step tutorials. I can teach you step-by-step how to paint this tulip, but to be able to give you the tools so that you can teach yourself to be your own favorite artist, to paint in your own personal style, that was where I really wanted to go. And I sat down and it took me, I think, a year to create Watercolor Mastery. I worked on it for a long time. At one point I scrapped it and started over. I really wanted you to be able to say, these are steps, these are concrete steps I can take to build my skills, to know I'm moving toward mastery, and then to stay encouraged during the process because we don't know how long it's going to take. And really exciting to launch Watercolor Mastery. It was about a year ago that we did it for the very first time, and to see the results from my students. So if you are ready to take that next step, to develop your personal style, I'd love to help you and encourage you in that process. So you don't have to linger in the dark and in self-doubt. From March 5th to 12th, I'm going to be sharing what Watercolor Mastery is all about, and whether and how you can know if this is the right step for you to take, if this is the next step that you need in your watercolor journey. So I have yards and miles of testimonials from students who have seen it transform their watercolor journey and help them have more confidence and to see progress, that they're moving in the right direction. And it's really exciting to be a part of that. I love seeing your breakthroughs. And so we're going to start that again in April. Enrollment happens March 5th to 12th. If you want to know more about it, I'm going to have an information session and a series of emails that will give you answers to all your questions and help you know if you're a fit for the course. And you can sign up for that, description below the video. You can also visit angelafair.com or angelafair.com, and I'll have links there for you to get on the waiting list so that you can get in on those information sessions. I want to thank you for joining me this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are, and wish you well. We're going to be back tomorrow. Tomorrow our outline is actually talking about all those times when you're painting on your own and needing to feel like you're getting somewhere. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to, we're going to take it in a new direction, and I'm going to show you some of the fun things I do to help me discover my own inner artist. And it's one of my favorite things to show you. So I can't wait to have you come and join me tomorrow. We're going to play with paint and really get into that splash course I promised. So thank you for joining me. Have a great rest of your day. Do get some paint happening on your paper, and be fearless. Be willing to do that rush of scary color and then see where it takes you. You have amazing adaptable powers, and letting watercolor have its head a little bit can open you up to those happy accidents and the watercolor magic that we talk about as being so addictive, the things that we want you to experience. So thank you. Have a great day. Bye for now.